Hello, I'm Lewis Morton from the IAM Project.
And I'm Matthew from the IAM Project as well.
And we're interviewing Eimear Colleen from Rainbow Project.
So I'm Colleen. I'm a youth worker for Out Northwest, which is a youth project through the Rainbow Project.
And I'm Eimear, and I work with the adult support services within the Rainbow Project in Derry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for coming along and talking with us today. I'm sure you have been very, very busy. So it's great to have you down and answer a couple of questions. So I suppose the first one, I keep forgetting what order we're doing these in. But sort of tell us a bit about your organisation, what it is, how you start, stuff like that.
So the Rainbow Project started in 1994. So basically we started as a group of volunteers responding to the HIV and AIDS crisis. And basically it was kind of to provide sexual health support and support for people to access knowledge and access contraception. And kind of like at that point there was a lot of stigma, there was a lot of discrimination. So we started from there, a group of volunteers providing social support, and as the years went on we've grown and kind of developed. We have a whole range of different things. So we kind of started as an organisation that was specifically for gay and bi men, and as the years have went on we've kind of transitioned, I think, as an organisation.
Yeah, 2012 it opened up to kind of broader health and wellbeing support for the full LGBT community. And it was really interesting too, because that was really reflected on the board as well, and so it was like with the flick of a switch there was a process that started to happen where the focus of the organisation completely shifted from something that was quite insular and maybe more narrow compared to what it is now. And now we've got how many members of staff working across different parts of Northern Ireland, running a really vast array of different services. I don't think you could have called that in 94 when it was started.
No, and there was an idea that, like, at that point, I suppose, with the kind of HIV and AIDS crisis and a lot of the talk, there was a real focus on men, and it's taken a while really for, I think, a lot of organisations to respond and recognise women within the community, trans people within the community. So it's definitely we kind of evolve and develop the more that we work and the more people and the more that we learn about the community. So we have our main kind of office is in Belfast. And we have an office in Derry. So we are a regional, like we're the biggest LGBTQ plus charity in Northern Ireland. And we work right across. So we have sexual health is still very much at our core of what we do. We're a sex positive organisation, and we are kind of like filling, I suppose, the gaps in terms of the evidence-based health gaps as well. So we have our sexual health service. We've got a really, really excellent counselling service. All our counsellors are co-cultural, which means that they're all from within the LGBTQ plus community. So we're kind of like providing mental health support there. We have an advocacy service which responds to the evidence that shows us that LGBTQ plus people are more likely to experience homelessness or discrimination or hate crimes in their homes. So our advocacy officer deals with kind of like the hate crime, and it's encouraging people to report that so we can get a true idea of the picture, I suppose, of like Northern Ireland in terms of like hate crime and experiences. We have a youth project that's solely based in Derry. So Derry's the only place that we have the youth project, and that's the project that I work on. And then we've got
loads of like group support then as well. So it's like a broader health and wellbeing focus. So the groups are specifically in Derry and other kind of regional areas. There's no groups yet kind of in Belfast that are just specific general wellbeing support, but they're more geared towards adults and LGBT adults. And so like in Derry, we've got loads of different specific groups. We've got groups for women, gay and bi men, trans people specifically, so that they're quite they're closed and confidential and private groups. Whereas then across regionally, we've got broader LGBT support groups for people in maybe different trusts or more rural areas, so people aren't having to travel to Belfast and Derry to access those groups. So we do a bit of everything, and especially now with lockdown, we're all doing a wee bit of everything, trying to, as you say, fill gaps and figure out where those gaps are and how we can maybe long term provide a service there rather than just filling that gap.
And I suppose like we're a holistic organisation, so we're not only just for mental health. We're kind of look at like people as whole people. So we would also work with like families and different things. So people come along to us and we try to respond to what it is that they need. We are like a charity that works with like a minority group within Section 75, but we don't receive anywhere near like that funding support from government than like other minority groups. I don't think any minority group receives enough funding to do the work that they're doing, but we definitely, I think we punch above our weight in terms of the or like the work that we do as opposed to the funding that we get, especially from statutory. So we do rely on a lot of charities to fund us, so there's always room for more, I think.
Definitely.
What sort of role do you have in the organisation? That sounds awful, both of you. That just sounds so accurate. Yeah. What role do you have in the organisation?
So we both work out of the dairy office. And so in the dairy office there's 5 members. Is there 5? 4 or 5 of us? So we're quite a small, like we're part of the larger Rainbow Project team, but everyone else is generally based in the Belfast office. So we kind of run, maintain and manage the services and the centre itself in Derry. And so I personally work with the adults, and so I facilitate all of the adult support groups, being that kind of first port of contact for getting people referred into counselling service, sexual health testing, and also signposting. So a lot of working in this kind of sector is working with other organisations and being kind of straddled in the middle there, so that you can be that link gateway from maybe our organisation then into something else if it was more suitable. And I think it's good also that we recognise that sometimes we're not the best place for some certain issues as well, so that we can have them maintain those good connections with all organisations to get people the best support that they need for that instance.
One thing we learned a lot in this documentary from interviewing different people is sort of there's a big problem in the whole LGBT community, but especially transgender community, around poverty and homelessness. Is that a thing that you try and address?
Yeah, so we do, like, I suppose, take each individual within their own context. So we do know that, like, both from statistics and also from our experience of working with people, that, we're definitely not anywhere near where we need to be in terms of like knowledge in terms of gender. So like people would say to us, like the older members of the community would say that they see where we're at right now with like gender is where they would have been at 30 years ago in terms of sexual orientation. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of like presumption. There's a lot of like risk as well to trans people coming out. So I suppose, a lot of the certainly with the young people and the youth project, a lot of what we would see in terms of homelessness and people not feeling safe at home would be more to do with like gender identity than sexual orientation right now. And so yeah, absolutely. So if you're not safe, if you're not safe at home, if you're outed to your parents, if your parents find out, if you don't feel safe coming out, there's physical safety, there's also emotional and mental safety as well. So a lot of people do make the choice to leave home, or they're forced to leave home for different reasons. And the poverty side of things, again, like employment, like people being safe, people being able to use their name and their own pronouns, a lot of that, there's a lot of barriers in terms of employment that can lead people really not to have access to the same pathways and routes. So yeah, so a lot of the work that we would do, I mean, we do have amazing partners in Derry and kind of the surrounding areas, so we're always trying to kind of look at like who's already doing the work, who can we lean on, who can our service users lean on as well. We work alongside the Benefits Office, the Housing Executive, the PSNI, different charities.
First Housing 3 years ago now started, led by local LGBT community who work in the housing sector, launched LGBT safe housing scheme. So they're responding basically to the need that LGBT people, specifically trans and non-binary people, were more likely, and it was for the age bracket 16 to 25, wasn't it? Were more likely to experience homelessness or be at risk at home, and so they were responding to that, and so there was a couple of services that had signed on to that, and and it's something that's still going, and it's an initiative that's being led by First Housing, and so we would refer into that often as well, and even just keeping in touch with them as well, so that we can, because people may get referred into that from Housing Executive, but they're not linked in with the services, and so sometimes then they'll contact us as well, so it's kind of like a twofold
It's
relationship.
always a bounce-off thing where you have people come in and they need that help. Or they'll have people come in that need your help, and then it's always great to have that connection between everybody.
Exactly.
You said the Rainbow Project I started in '94, which is quite a long time ago for an LGBT group to start. How do you think attitudes have changed since then?
It's really interesting talking to, because I mean, I suppose what's really gorgeous about the LGBTQ plus community is that many communities that we're a part of outside of sexual orientation and gender identity are geographical. So you grew up in a community, you grew up in a family, but this community is you've got so many people from different places, different age groups, and so we really enjoy listening to and learning from the older people in our community. And when we hear them speaking about what life was like for them 20-30 years ago, it is almost unrecognizable. And so we've both worked on Pride, and we had celebrated 25 years of Floyd Pride there a few years ago, and one of our committee members was saying when they first started Pride, they couldn't. So I'll explain first, we're a non-commercial Pride, so we don't take we don't sell ourselves out for a sponsorship on the side of a truck. We're very much a community Pride, and we've kept that ethos right throughout the 25 years. It's very important. And so when it came up to 25 years, it was lots of people were getting contacted being can we put this truck in your parade? And we're well, we're a walking parade, so no. And we're a community parade, and you don't buy your way onto the parade. That's not how we work. So one of the committee members was saying the reason why that's so important is that when they first started with Pride, they couldn't get anywhere to even host them for a meeting. They were being asked to leave the bars. They so their meetings were in somebody's house, and the big kind of splash out was for a packet of Jammy Dodgers. Do you know what I mean? So, and then we're can we get fancy t-shirts, and can we do this? And they're remember where we've come from. So it's really interesting to hear that, and I think that one of the things is there's so much of that I feel there's a danger of that getting lost, because all that history, it's because it was kind of almost underground, it's carried in people's heads, and
I almost think it's a wee bit hypocritical the way some businesses do it. You have all the foil, you have all the Pride things here. Do you still sell stuff in Saudi Arabia? Do you still sell? Do you still do that?
We were talking about that before. If you look back to the Belfast Pride one, there's so many big companies walking in it, and you're
so commercialized.
You're just doing this. Majority of yous are just doing this for doing it. It's not really there for it.
If you look at so what kind of irks me about that is that, say you take one of those, I'm not going to name any names, but one of those big corporate brands, I know exactly where this whole conversation is going to go, I'm just going to put it out there. If you take one of those big corporate brands, if they're putting, so you have to, basically for the bigger Pride, you have to pay to enter into the parade, and depending on the amount of people that you have, and if you want a vehicle and how many speakers, you pay extra. So you can pay up to so for a small group, walking group like us, it's £500. So you can imagine what it's like for people who have props and trucks, right? And so that is an expense in itself. Then you have to kit out all of your staff. If you've got 100 people walking, which in a big parade like that, it's not even much. If you've got 100 people walking, you're giving them all t-shirts, branded t-shirts with the rainbow logo on it, the rainbow whatever. Say you're going to spend $5,000 on one Pride for your organisation to walk in that Pride, we could never afford that. Ever. But we would also never get that money from those organisations in terms of a support service.
We do have a great initiative, because I think there's room for them all. Do you know? I think for people, because we would know that there's LGBTQ plus kind of groups within these organisations who are so keen to be marching the Pride, and for them, their organisation supporting them means a great deal. But we have a project or a initiative that we work alongside Stonewall with, and it's diversity champions. So basically, we're kind of saying to organisations class, if you want to do all that what Eimear said, spend all that money and do all that, but actually it's also what you need to do is you need to train your staff. You need to make sure that your working environment is a safe place for your employees, your queer employees, and your employees who are allies, so that they have knowledge and they know what their responsibility is. And then also, like, you know, you can donate to the Rainbow Project or other LGBTQ plus organisations, and your money through us will actually, you know, be put to use in terms of providing counselling sessions. And it's almost like trying to, I suppose, like, offset some of the damage that's been done by society. Do you know, really?
Because at the end of the day, like, visibility isn't the be all end all, but it's so key. It's so important. So as you say, it is really key to have those people represented within their companies, within the workplaces or the unions. But like, visibility doesn't reinforce values or safety within certain spaces as well. So as you say,
and we don't need to have like standard prides. Like, that's the beauty of every you know, every place and every group of people will have different ideas and different things that they want. And what's great is that, you know, you don't want to go to the same standard runoff of a pride all the time. You know, we love ours because we're a wee bit biased. We think Wild Pride is great, but, you know, like, we recognise the bias there as
and
well.
Also, the good thing is that you couldn't take an 18-wheeler down Shipkey Street with people on it if you wanted to. Do you know, like, they'd fall off. So we could never do it even if we wanted to. So we've kind of got that excuse as well.
One thing, like, this documentary focusing on is sort of the urban-rural, you know, divide between LGBT, and it seems like in Belfast and Derry, especially areas like South Belfast, which are very liberal, sort of open mind compared to the rest of the north. How do you think, like, that divide is between urban and rural when it comes to LGBT community?
I think it's really important to say, first of all, that growing up queer in a city and in a rural area is a completely different experience. I think that they're for a whole lot of different reasons. So, like, I think when you grow up in a rural area, it's a very, like, and it's not a negative thing. Like, I grew up in a rural area. It's amazing. There's an amazing sense of community, but you're under a microscope, you know. And the thing is like, you know, you're under that microscope. You kind of, like, are looking around. In my experience in working in rural areas as well, people tend to leave, so they're seeking out, you know, a space, and maybe that's a safe space, or maybe that's other people like them. So the problem is, people are sitting in a rural area looking around, and they don't see anyone like them. You know, they don't see necessarily, you know, queer couples living together, or dropping their kids off at school, or, you know, participating in faith. So I think that there's a difficulty of isolation. So that's one thing. So I think, like, you know, there is that, you know, idea that, like, you grow up and you're like, am I the only gay person in the village? Do you know? And that's like a joke that's kind of ongoing with a lot of, like, rural people who then are like,
do the Welsh accent.
I know. And then you kind of find, like, you know, grips, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. There's an actual community out there. But I suppose for me, like, that's all well and good, but, like, people shouldn't have to leave to find that. So that's the problem. So so you can get on a bus and go in a car and go to a city, and you'll find a community, or you'll find social spaces or a bar or whatever. But, you know,
you shouldn't have to be forced to do it.
But you shouldn't have to be forced to do it.
Because that was something that I had growing up, whenever I was, like, trying to figure myself out, 12, 14 even. Like, I felt isolated, left behind, because of where I was. I lived in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, like. So to me it was like, oh, I'll have to go to the city, or I'll have to move country altogether. And that's kind of what I ended up doing. Whenever I got the chance to move I went to the north of Wales for university. That's the first thing I did. I went there, and that's how I sort of found myself more better.
And was it class?
It was brilliant.
You know. But there's still a part of you that's, like, still back in, you know, like that, like, rural area going.
You still feel like you're like,
I wish it was better there. Like, I wish, you know, there was more.
You had those chances there, and you could meet those kind of people there.
And I think that, like, listen, this exists for, like, across the board for so many different things. Do you know, when you're looking at, like, the services, like, you know, mental health services, like, you know, disability groups and support and stuff like that, we're moving to a better place now, but it's slow moving and it's slow progress, and it's incredibly difficult, I think, for groups to set up in rural areas, because the mountain that they have to climb is much bigger, and I don't think that funders necessarily at times recognise that. And there's also, I mean, we have so much support in Derry. Like, we work in partnership with amazing organisations, and we lean on each other for different things. and it makes life a lot easier in terms of doing what you're trying to do. But then when you go out into an area, and we do have rural, we have a project that has been working to set up groups specifically in rural areas, is that there's a lack of infrastructure. So even trying to get a space to meet is incredibly difficult. Before you even name it as LGBTQ plus, trying to secure a safe space to meet, a space that's going to be open, a space that's going to be warm, that people can access is incredibly difficult. And then you kind of, you add on the aspect of identity that some people in different areas, not just in rural areas, in the city as well, will take issue with. We don't want an LGBT group meeting here, or maybe it might not be as open as that, but there's a feeling of like that's maybe not a safe space to meet. So those battles are way more hard when you're kind of in a space where it doesn't have, like, you don't have the pick of the centres you could use. You don't have like those long-standing relationships as well. But what we have noticed is the areas where there has been a worker committed to that, like over a longer period of time, is there. So people say there's no queer people in the country. There's definitely queer people in the country. There's definitely queer people in rural areas. It's just that there's nowhere for people to like come together. And so we're getting numbers in areas where people would raise their eyebrows and be like, really? So what that shows is that if you dedicate like money, resources and staff members to that, you actually can, you can create spaces. And for young people then coming through to be able to look and see, well, there's like an LGBTQ plus group in my village or in my town, instantly that will have an impact on how you feel. And like if you feel safe, if you feel like you can look, everyone wants to look at people and see their future. Like that's what we do in the media. Like we want to look at people and go, maybe I could be like that, or maybe that's what my future holds. And we want to have that as hope and positive futures, rather than a lot of the kind of like, because we talk a lot about discrimination and about hate crimes, and sometimes it can feel like, is my future going to be filled with like terrible experiences, and you want to just see like two same-gendered like people living together, just doing normal things, having the crack, going out for beer, raising their wains or doing whatever, like, and that's just normal. So I think that's what we need, but I think that there are obstacles for sure in rural areas.
What sort of advice for people in rural area would you give them?
I think that I suppose like the first point is like try to reach out somewhere, because I think that any contact's better than no contact. I think that often, the nature of the work that we do, because we try to make sure that, our service users' confidentiality is respected, that some of our work and some of our groups often aren't advertised widely. So I suppose like, contact the Rainbow Project, and that's how you'll find out what is happening if there's anything in your local area. We do have a model that has been developed by one of our staff members, Marty, that, that we can support people. We might not to be able to come along and run a group, but if you're interested in kind of finding out like how do we go about this, we have resources that we've developed, and that could be a personal development program that you start off with to kind of test out the water. Can be advice on what's went before. Maybe there's not a group in your area, but maybe like 10 miles or 15 miles away there is a group that you might want to kind of find out how they started, so we can connect you with people. I suppose like one of the positives of COVID is that we have taken a lot of our stuff online, and what that's showing us is that has given us access to people and communities that we really in the past wouldn't have been able to offer support to, and it's really challenged us to think about going forward how we adapt our services and how we adapt what we do to reach as many people as possible. I don't think that we, like post-COVID we'll go back to doing things how we've done things. I think we'll be kind of going, okay, so we have a youth group and we've got like someone from Garva and Cookstown and Fermanagh, rural Fermanagh, and all these different areas. How do we keep this going so that actually this they can still access it? So I think it's really, it opens up different avenues in terms of like the online world, but as you said, you shouldn't have to leave. So really what it is, it's like we want to try to support people in their local communities to suppose like gather other, like let's get together and make a plan. So like,
Definitely.
and it could be like, you might be sitting there from a town and you're like, well, I don't know any other LGBTQ plus people. We might have 3 people from the same town who've contacted us, and we might be able to go, right, let's set up a wee meeting, have a chat, and we'll, do our best to do that. So so there's definitely opportunities, and we do have like resources that we can that we can kind of like lend.
One thing we were discussing was sort of like Northern Ireland obviously is a very, very religious part of Europe, part of the world, and one thing we're talking about is schools, and of course religion plays a very big part in a lot of schools in Northern Ireland. How do you think that has negatively impacted people growing up who are LGBT? Coming from that sort of religious schooling background.
That and sort of what kind of needs to change in schools and change in general sort of help.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to recognise that like religion plays, like church and state here are like massively connected, and I think that that's problematic for loads of different reasons. And in particular, like the assumption that we have like 2 religions in Northern Ireland and that's it, and you're either one or the other, and you can't be anything else, or you can't be like have no faith. Like there's no room for any of that. So so like I know
majority of the country just ends up being 2 faiths. That's just the big unfortunate thing.
And I think so for us, when we talk about schools, like we hear a lot of the negative experiences of young people who are accessing our project who have had a really tough time, and we see clearly the kind of consequence of that in terms of their mental health, their self-worth, and also the fact that they're more likely to leave school early. I think that schools are not held under the same kind of like legislation as businesses and charities. So when you're in employment, you're kind of under like Section 75, you're protected in terms of that anti-discrimination legislation. That's not the case in schools. So schools aren't like under kind of any obligation to record like homophobic bullying or provide like any evidence that they're doing work to address any of that. Some schools are amazing, I have to say. Some teachers are amazing. Some schools are actually doing unbelievable work and moving really quickly and adapting really quickly to the needs of the young people and really recognising that they have work to do, and some schools aren't. And the problem is it's inconsistent, so you don't have the same standard across the board. And you're just invisible in school a lot of the time as an LGBTQ plus person. You never hear your identity referred to in a positive way. You're not included in terms of language. We hear from young people who've had to sit through religious education and been forced to write down like quotes from different things from the Bible, and
I hated it so much.
And it's really, really difficult. So I suppose like that's one aspect in terms of schools. So it's visibility, it's safety, and it's also just a celebration of diversity as well. So you don't just want to be safe, you want to be appreciated and celebrated as a whole person, including your sexual orientation, your gender identity, or whatever other beautiful things you are. And so that's a difficulty, I think, here in terms of Northern Ireland, and that's a difficulty in terms of visibility. It's a difficulty in terms of access to sexual health and relationship education, and the consequence of that is, when you're not provided education and knowledge, you can't make informed decisions. So we have the risk of young people making decisions without the full knowledge. And that's risky and that's dangerous. So like we do a lot in our youth project to try to kind of fill those gaps. So we have a great sexual health program. People hear sexual health and they're terrified, but it's a lot to do with consent, safety online, a lot to do with self-worth and like knowing how to communicate to a partner, talking about, domestic abuse and things like that. So we're trying to basically provide all the knowledge so the young people are as safe as they can be. I think religion is, and the other side of that is also is difficult, and a lot of, I think it's, we don't make any assumptions that the queer people don't have faith or are not religious or don't want to be religious, because that's not the case, and we know that that's not the case. So but often we're excluded from areas of religion and areas of faith. We've done a lot of work
There's brilliant stuff going on now. Like on the other side of that coin, there's brilliant work going on and partnership work going on with not only ourselves but the full LGBT sector and LGBT religious groups and just religious groups who aren't LGBT but recognise that their faith maybe hasn't been as inclusive or currently isn't as inclusive, and so they're stepping outside. And you do see there's banners that when we did the Pride exhibition, there was banners that I seen that we were working with these groups in Rainbow, but I never would have put the two and two together, you know, Christians with Pride and other groups who have just these gorgeous banners that come in year out. And then like whenever I started to work in Rainbow Project, we had board members who were part of these groups, do you know, and I thought, oh my god, like yous are really, really embedded in this, and like we worked over 25 years, you've been working on this, and I've been saying religion doesn't have a place in Pride and in LGBT people's lives because it was damaging and that was wrong, and so I've spent the last 2.5 years reevaluating that kind of relationship that people have, because the reality of it is you shouldn't have to compromise any part of your identity. And if you are a unionist, or if you are, you know, depending on your sectarian background, your religious background, and that's the other thing about being geographical in Northern Ireland is that depending on the community that you grow up can be tied to certain religions and sectarian backgrounds as well, and you shouldn't, that is as much part of you as your sexual orientation or your gender identity as
and
well.
we just love putting people in boxes here. We love saying
Definitely.
well, because you're LGBT, you definitely are not religious, and you must hate Christians, and you must do this,
and you have to live here,
and it's not the case. And I think that that's partly to do, you know, there's definitely a link with our legacy of conflict here and how we've navigated that and come out, and we need to know, like, well, who are you, and what will tell me the information that I need to know about you is I need to know, like, what religion are you? Oh, but if you're queer, then you obviously like hate all religion. And so a lot of people do sacrifice, like they make choices to sacrifice, you know, that kind of like spiritual aspect of their lives, because like they kind of like see that like the identity and the support for the identity. So I suppose like we're trying to again encourage that kind of holistic approach, you know.
There's consequences.
Know
to
that you're
as
not
well.
sitting in a church or in a chapel, and you don't have queer people sitting around you. Like that's just it's happening, and you know, religion as well is one of those things that it's about spirituality, it's about faith, but it's also about, like, again, in rural areas, like a social connection. Do you know what I mean? Especially right now, like there's like very little to do than going to mass. So you know, but like, is there room? You know, can you be all of those things?
Because we were talking to Molly there from Mid Ulster Pride, and she was saying that she still is a big, you know, she's still Christian, and she still practices all that. And we were sitting here like,
does that surprise you?
That surprised me particularly, because the background I'm from, I grew up in Baptist church with grandparents, stuff like that, and they were like, you're wrong if you're gay, you're not allowed to be gay, you know, it's bad for you. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm just not gonna believe in anything then, and just get on with it.
Messaging as well, do you know what I mean? Like, because especially even like my parents' generation would have probably felt the same, but they were never told any different. So if you think about the people like Molly and like the folks at Mid Ulster Pride and like the people who are marching in these groups and who are organising these faith-based LGBT queer groups, that is the message that now our generations, I think, will be handing on to kids. And then that's how that kind of bias, it either shapes and transforms or it disappears, you know. And that's so exciting.
It's like, it's an individual aspect. Like, so I think faith is incredibly individual. So again, if you strip away the institutions attached to it, and you kind of like, you know, strip all that away and you take it as an individual thing, you have the right to have faith. It doesn't matter what anybody else tells you. It doesn't actually matter. You know, it's about like finding, it's about you kind of like, or you have the right to have lack of faith. You know, that's the other thing. So it's you as a person, it's how you see the world and how you interact with the world, and what your experience is completely your right to do that. You know, so it's kind of like, and it's almost like we're on, I think, this journey trying to break a lot of that down and be like, well, actually, if we want to have access to like places of faith, then we should have the right to do that. And it's about and I think like it might not be the place where you've maybe like been born, the religion you've been born into.
One interesting part in Ireland as a whole, but more so with the Catholic faith, but Protestants as well, as there's been sort of a breakdown in trust, particularly with Catholicism, with the public, you know, with recent scandals. I think personally that's maybe helped bring forward LGBT issues a lot in Ireland. Do you think it has or not? It's the same as some Protestant group, but particularly with the Catholic Church, with, you know, sort of people maybe are still religious today.
Yeah.
Who are from a Catholic background but feel less connected to the institution of the church.
Well, I think that like no institution should hold the power that the Catholic Church has held in Ireland. I think it's and it was an all-consuming power. It was the final last word on everything. And I think as we have uncovered abuse and the scandals and the horrific things that happened in the mother and baby homes, I think that I think you're right, that has like allowed people to look critically upon the institution of the Catholic Church and know that that actually we need to do that with all institutions.
And that critical thinking maybe has got straight people maybe feel more accepting of homosexuality maybe in a certain way, and thinking, you know, maybe because I don't have to follow the dogmatic beliefs as much, I can maybe be more accepting of the LGBT community. And I think there's a space for, you know, I think there's definitely further to go on that. But I do think like I think we're kind of on a journey with that, and I think you know, it's kind of like it's like it's not the be all and end all. It's a community, and it's a social space that you participate in. It's your space of faith. But I know that, like, you know, I mean, we've seen like the Pope making statements, and we've, you know, I think we're further along than we've ever been with church, but I don't think that means that we can kind of just sit back. I think there's a lot to still be challenged,
Definitely.
you know, and particularly that role, that connection between church and state and power, you know. And it's not to say that we want to go into any church or any religion and change everything. That's not it. But like, we really need to have like a legislation should be made by like you know, elected representatives. And
one problem,
you know,
here is the elected representatives, particularly like the DUP, have such a dogmatic religious belief that it makes them that it makes them just got son of mayor and just got never mayor there. The DUP and stuff, they have such a dogmatic religious belief within their thing that dictates a lot of their social policy, which is something that maybe wouldn't be such a case in the UK or in the rest of Europe in most countries, you know. I think we're in a really unique situation here. I think politics is especially around kind of identity politics, is incredibly difficult to have those conversations, and I think it's like a lot to do with the fear of change. It's a lot, you know, it's connected to a lot of kind of social justice issues, and I think it's, I mean, like connected to class as well. Do you know? I think like if you are well off and you have financial freedom, you know, your life is much easier as an LGBTQ plus person, as a trans non-binary person. You have more freedom, you know. So I think that there's like, I think it's really like within that, it's like you can be like, you can practice kind of that quite conservative view but still have your own freedoms. And I think really the people who kind of really lose out there and the most vulnerable people are working class people. People maybe are more middle class, just people in general who maybe go to universities, go abroad, have more of an open minded thing. And I mean, say a straight couple who went to university in England and had children who turned out to be gay, that would make them more accepting than maybe a working class family who left school in secondary school sort of thing. I think though, like in my experience, to be honest, like it's the working class communities where we found the most solidarity, I have to say. And I think because working class people really know struggle, and it might not be the same struggle, but it's struggle, it's a no injustice, I think, and it's that shared feeling, and I think that can be the connector. Do you think that's maybe why Derry is such a centre for the LGBT community? Derry is such a
special thing
vibrant
about
history of that sort of struggle, and you know, the special thing about Derry, and you touched on it, is that even the community and voluntary sector, but any community group and any minority group, any group at all actually, it's all community based. And it's probably over years of Derry having not ever had much money being pumped into it. And so people got resourceful, and like as Colleen said, like Pride fundraised so that they could have a tea, a milkshake and jammy Dodger night. That was a good night out for Pride. For other community groups, the projects that we run them on a shoestring, and we run them in partnership with each other, so that we can contribute £100, you contribute £100, and at the end of the day all three of our groups are better off, because we never, you know, historically there was never any other option.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
And so that is where the solidarity comes out of, and that's where the real sense of community comes out of. And it goes right back to people cooking for each other for the streets while there was people away, or while, you know, like in Derry, if somebody gets sick or if somebody passes away, then communities drive in to help each other, and somebody's baking bread and buns and somebody's cooking sandwiches. You know, but like it's those wee things that are like actions of love in a way. Do you know what I mean? Because like people kick into gear when there's change, or when somebody needs something, people in Derry kick into gear.
Derry likes to think it's like a city, but it's
not.
It's like a big village. Do you know what I mean?
Which is a great. It's the best compliment.
Class,
I like. You wouldn't want it to lose that.
I think Derry has had LGBT as well, but other festivals and all recently, like the Halloween ones and things like that. Not the traditional sort of sectarian 12th, maybe things like that. Things that are quite divisive, but things that bring in tourists, things that bring in sort of a more socially liberal sort of attitude. I think that's the thing that's brought forward. That's the thing that it's very difficult in rural communities to have.
100%. And I think like it's not only difficult to have those in rural areas, it's difficult to even know what's going on, I think, outside of the rural areas, because you'll have the Halloween festival and you have all these different kind of even cultural and diversity expressions in terms of festivals or days or events, but like the communication for those things and the advertising never really it's in the Derry bubble. So like outside of that, like how would you even know what's going on in Derry? And it's only that if you're part of these different groups. So I think there's a barrier to accessing those, you know, for people in rural areas as well. Now the Carnival Initiative, who run the Halloween parade, are very good at like kind of like their eye is always going outside of Derry. It's all, you know, so like, and even Strabane often based, like, you know, it's part of our council area, but it's often totally forgot about in terms of like, oh, we must do something in Strabane to cover ourselves. But you know, there's a huge need for, I think, services to really reach outside of those city boundaries and everything, do you know, and really be creative about it as well.
Well, this or a group, this IAM, they have a Zamba band that goes to the Halloween thing each year.
Samba band, I think there's a few dancers and stuff go up and do the Halloween stuff and all.
But 100 dancers and 25 Samba members apparently.
Exact numbers for you there. So just would you have any advice to offer someone if they were to sort of start their own group, like something like this?
So I say reach out. So you know, contact the Rainbow Project. We're very good at communicating what we can and can't do. So we'll be totally honest with you. But we have a wealth of experience working across Northern Ireland and like doing a lot of cross-border work as well. So I'd say like reach out, have a cup of tea and a bit of a chat. Have an idea as well, I think, what it is that you're wanting. Like what do you want it to be? You know, because in the sector, like the LGBTQ plus sector, you've got everything from, you know, a casual social meetup where you have people meeting up in a cafe, right through to, you know, intensive mental health support. So try to kind of like match what, you know, what your aim is with the group to your capacity. One
thing I noticed, I canvassed during the gay marriage referendum down south. I was in Donegal, which obviously is a very rural area, sort of similar to a lot of places in the north, you know. I noticed that there's a lot more sort of acceptance than you might think in rural areas. It's just you have to go out and reach there. Yeah, if
I
you
think
go
that's
out
the
and
case.
say that,
I think that's the case
more accepting
everywhere.
than you might imagine. Like people that live in Belfast, live in Derry, might think, Jesus, everybody in the countryside, they're very religious, they're very socially conservative. Yeah. But I think there is a slight change that way, but it's still a lot different, still a lot more conservative than urban areas. And a lot, I think, like, you know, often villages are, you know, like they're kind of like focused on a religious or some kind of a religion. I think, you know, and we were talking about this earlier with Paddy, like we were saying, like the rural areas get such a bad rep, like, do you know, and definitely. And like the thing about it is if it's, you know, it's not the people, it's the access to knowledge and access, it's representation, you know. So if you're not in an area where you are
like living alongside LGBTQ plus people and no one talks to you about it and no one is open in that dialogue, then how do you learn about people? How do you challenge those stereotypes that you have and that prejudice? Like, and that is the danger of the idea of like, well, sure, just move away, or well, you know, can you not just go to the one in Derry, or can you not just go to this one?
Or you head on the internet, you don't know what you're going to find.
100%. Definitely.
It's always another thing.
Talking about the LGBT community is, if people from that community just leave each time just because they feel, then things don't change that quickly, or no change at all. It is staying there and making a presence, you know.
And if you could make the presence, then you're that person that then somebody, it's so simple, you're that person that somebody can look at and say, oh wow, I feel that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like you can be the, and then that just snowballs really quickly. But it's like, if you can't say it, you can't be it. Do you know, like you just wouldn't know. And as you say, if you move away, you're removing that also, not just for yourself, but for the rest of the community as well.
And that's where allies really, I think, like there's a role to play for everyone, because you really, like, as a community, it's not like just our place to go, well, you said that and that's not really good, that language wouldn't be appropriate, or this is why.
You can turn people off if you go too, you know, it's like, if somebody misgender pronouns or something, doesn't mean they're transphobe, it just, they doesn't know how to say that. So if you attack people too much, you turn them the opposite direction.
And
sometimes.
if you ask like LGBT people to be the sole people who speak out and speak up and challenge language and educate, it's too much of a burden to hold. You can't, you know, you're coming at that with like your own experiences of, you know, like, am I safe? Is this person that I'm talking to actually going to be super homophobic and come at me aggressively? There's all that in your mind. You have a place of privilege as, like, you know, a cis straight person to actually take on those battles in a way that, you know, your self-worth is not at risk because of what comes back. So really, like, that's really what the community needs, is good allies. Call out people using language. You know, it doesn't always have to be like, you're homophobic, but like, this is why that language is homophobic. So it's like challenging the behaviour, not the person. And also then, you know, in order to safely hold queer people in rural areas, we need to make sure that their experiences in rural areas are good ones, or else people, you know, won't want to. So like, you know, your shop, your schools, your bars, you know, and it is like slowly together chipping away at that, like, our held beliefs around sexual orientation and gender identity. And it's possible. We see it happening every day. You know, and I think the more people come out and the more people are like, well, I've got a queer person in my family, or, you know, my cousin, my uncle, like, you know, like, for a point, everybody had a gay uncle. I don't know why.
It's just cool back then.
I know, I don't, as far as I know, but, you know, you never know.
The gay uncle always lived in England. That was the problem,
you know.
Exactly.
So we need to fight for that as if it's like our family and our friends that we're fighting for, you know.
Just last question. We've run out of time. But so, is there sort of anything you'd want to say, or even any advice or information you'd like to add for the end of this, to give to people so they know sort of where to turn to or who to talk to, how to get in contact with you even?
I would say, no matter what your query is, if it's for yourself, a loved one, or if you're just listening to this and you're cis and you're straight and you want to know more about what you can do in the community, just give us a buzz. Like, as Colleen said, like, there's plenty of us to be able to pick up the phone and chat to you and try and put your mind at ease, and also maybe get you signposted into, if it's for yourself, into one of our services if that's what you wanted. But I think that there's never any harm out of a simple conversation. So like, we'll pass you on our contact info and you can post it up. But
well, you've got like Facebook and all, so if anybody wants to message you that, so just Rainbow
contact
Project.
So our website is just www.rainbowproject. So if you just type Rainbow Project NI in Google, you'll find us on our website, and it's got loads of information about what we do. You'll find us on Facebook. Send an email through to info@rainbowproject.org, and that's all on the website too. And you know, I suppose, like, there's a role in place for everyone. So if you're a queer person who wants support, get in contact. You're our priority. If you're a family member who's a bit worried, get in contact. If you're, you know, sitting in an organisation where you're like, I'd love to be able to, for us to have training, because we, you know, recognise that we don't know enough. brilliant, get in contact, we'll provide training. If you're sitting and you're like, you know what, I think that queer people deserve to be safe, happy, healthy, and part of this community, then, you know, just spend some time like learning and talking to people and challenging and calling out that language. And I think there's so much power in all of that. So there's a role and a place for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. It's great.
I'm like really excited now thinking about the future society of Northern Ireland.